Howdy good folks, and welcome to my VHS 99 review. If you don't know, VHS is a horror anthology series. For a while this was a completed trilogy, and then Shudder came along and revived it last year for a fourth film, and now we've got the fifth, and next year we're getting the sixth. So this has gone from being a very cool, albeit completed trio of films into being what you might now call the definitive long-running horror anthology series of our times, because I can't think of anything else that's like this in movies. The closest thing in terms of length would be the Amicus Portmanteau series from the late 60s, early 70s, but that was a long time ago now. Creepshow had a good run for a while in the 80s. I think that series might have got to 3 films possibly, but I was never a big fan of those anyway. But I've always liked VHS though, right since the first one came out, and I was hotly anticipating to see what would be in store this time around. So let's begin by talking a little bit about the wraparound story. It's a good place to start, but I don't think we'll be on this for very long because there isn't really a wraparound story in the 5th VHS. It's never really been a strong suit of this franchise anyway, the wraparound. These particular segments have been very hit and miss throughout the films up to this point. In the first 2 films, the wraparound was dreadful. It got a little bit better for the 3rd and the 4th films, but this time they just haven't bothered. What they've done instead is have these little segments of toy army men doing gory, funny battles. And yeah, they're very entertaining. They gave me a few giggles. They don't really have much relation to the main stories, but I'm fine with that. I'd rather a film like this do something silly and inconsequential rather than come up with some really unsatisfying way of linking the main stories together. The first VHS, for example, brilliant film in terms of its main stories, but the wraparound segment was its one weakness, definitely. This film doesn't have to worry about that, so we can score 1 point for VHS 99 already. But let's get into the main stories. I'm going to take these in the exact order in which they appear in the movie, and I don't think you have to worry about spoilers. I'm conscious that this is a brand new film that's just come out, so I'm going to try and be very wary of not giving too much away of what happens in each individual tale. Right, let's jump into it, and we will start with this one. And we're off to a blazing start because this is brilliant. This is about a young punk rock band called Rack. I don't know if that's a reference to breasts or not. They're sort of an up-and-coming band on the local scene. They're developing their notoriety, and they're even shooting a little documentary of themselves. One night they travel to this abandoned nightclub to shoot some footage of themselves playing. I guess this is for the latest episode of their little documentary thing. But the reason this club shut down in the first place is because there was a fire that broke out there that claimed the lives of another young band called Bitch Cat. Another really great name for a band, I love it. Bitch Cat died by being trampled on by their own fans as they tried to run to the exit. I don't know why Bitch Cat themselves didn't try and run for the exit, but anyway. Bitch Cat take umbrage to the idea of Rack coming along and playing on their turf, so to speak. So Bitch Cat, now being spirits, they try and kill the members of Rack. So the horror in this segment, once we get to it, is very much a case of Rack versus Bitch Cat, humans versus ghosts, and who is going to come out on top. But the reason I love this little story so much is just all the stuff leading up to the horror. This band Rack, they're so funny. Their interactions between each other are just absolutely hilarious. And every time we get a little documentary moment, it's so funny. They've got this thing, I can't remember actually if this is Rack or Bitch Cat, because we do get to see some footage of Bitch Cat as well from back when they were alive. But one of these two bands, they do this thing where just before they're about to do a gig or something, that they all get together and go, "Let's fuck shit up!" And it's like, I'm just thinking to myself, you tossers, but it's really funny as well. One of these little documentary clips, one of them on a BMX bike just drives into a goal net and then just falls off his bike, and it's the most pointless thing you've ever seen. But this entire segment is just full of stupid little pointless funny things. It's really entertaining, and this is before we even get to the horror at the end of it. I very much got vibes of like the 90s from this, that the MTV era. I was made to think of Return of the Living Dead. That there's definitely a feel of that once we get to the actual kills. This overall film, it's not just called VHS 99 for the sake of it. It does try and go back to the 90s and show you a few things that will very much give you nostalgia vibes and we get those straight away with this first story. The only tiny little negative with this segment is, so there's one character in Rack who's an absolute killjoy, and he got on my nerves a little bit. But apart from him, the rest of this was just absolutely superb. I want to watch it again right now. So in this one, a young woman is trying to get into a certain sorority house. To do so, though, she'll have to pass an initiation with the other girls, which in this instance means being buried alive in a coffin for an entire night. And obviously things go a little bit wrong and the woman ends up stuck down there. Now, I personally found this to be the weakest of the 5 segments in this film. It's also the only one of the 5 which doesn't really have any comedy in it. It's very serious. So it's surprising then, actually, on a personal level, that I would find it to be my worst of the bunch, because normally I prefer my horror to be serious and straight down the line. I don't actively seek out horror comedies, usually, but this film really taps into a certain phobia that I have. It really made me go, ooh. I'm not even talking about the phobia of being buried alive. No, there's another phobia that comes to the fore when you watch this, and I won't reveal what it is because that would be giving away one of the surprises of the story. But yeah, it just didn't quite do it for me overall. I think if I was going to take any one of these stories out of the film and leave it aside as like a Blu-ray extra or something, I would probably have chosen this one to come out, because even though I would definitely rewatch this entire movie tomorrow, I think this is the one story that I wouldn't look forward to rewatching. It's a surprise as well because Johannes Roberts directs this one, and normally I love his full-length movies. He did 47 Meters Down in its sequel, and I absolutely love those films. He also did the Resident Evil remake, and I think that is sort of all right. It's ironic because in the original VHS, there was a segment by Ty West, or T West, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. He's a guy who I just don't really like his full-length movies, and yet in the original VHS, his was my favourite segment. It's funny how it works out sometimes. Aussies Dungeon is a throwback to those children's TV shows you used to get in the 80s, 90s. So basically what would happen is there would be kids wearing like elbow pads and helmets, and within the confines of a studio setting, they would be crawling around tunnels and jumping into swimming pools of slime and hunting for prizes, and there would be like a studio audience mostly made up of kids just baying and screaming, and maybe there would be a blue team and a yellow team, and it would all be colourful and silly. I guess the equivalent show we had in the UK was Funhouse, although there was another one called Terror Towers that I probably would have classed as my personal favourite, albeit it didn't last as long as Funhouse, and no doubt the Americans would have had their equivalent TV shows. So in this, we watch an episode of Aussies Dungeon, a fictional version of the type of show that I've just described, and I thought this segment was just going to be that. I thought the horror of this segment was just going to be the realisation on the behalf of us older viewers that we actually used to sit and watch this type of shit and think of it as a worthy pastime. And if all this had been an episode of Aussies Dungeon, I would have been absolutely fine with that, because I was really enjoying it. I was laughing, I was just shaking my head. I thought it was great, but it's not just that. We eventually do get a story. So the Aussies Dungeon section is maybe just the first third of this. This might be the longest story in the anthology. I'm not sure without timing them all, but it might also be my favourite, because I just thought this was great, and the horror when we get to it is it's just brilliant as well. I've seen a lot of great movie villains in the world of horror over the years, but not many of them can compare to what we get in this. Basically a big fat angry mama carrying a beaker of green acid around as if it's a handgun or something. Just perfect. Why do we have to wait 12 months to get another one of these films? Another superb one. So here we have a group of young punks. They're sort of similar to the group from the first story, except this lot are not in a band. They're just idling around from day to day, wandering around the neighbourhood. They're of that age, 15, 16, where they can't really think about anything but girls. They're like a bunch of walking hard-ons, these kids. They think about nothing but girls. And one day they realise that across the street from where one of them lives, there's this really attractive young woman of about 20, I'd say, and none of them think that it's suspicious that this woman owns her own home, even though she's extremely young. So for a while, they start perving on this woman. They start looking at her through her window using their camcorders, and they go around to her back garden at one point and spy on her when she's sunbathing. But this woman is not quite the innocent young blonde that they think, and it leads to big trouble down the line. And I'm not going to say what that trouble is. I'll let you discover the rest of the story for yourselves, but it's absolutely top-notch. Again, we get the non-horror part of this segment and the horror part, and both are wildly entertaining. I had such a good time with this. There's this hilarious moment as well. There's loads of funny bits, to be honest, but there's this one moment in particular where this delivery driver van comes up and this guy starts talking to this blonde, and once she walks away, this guy clearly thinks that he's done really well with her, had a good conversation with her. So when her back's turned, he starts doing this Michael Jackson moonwalk, and all the kids who are watching this playing out from through a window on the other side of the street are just absolutely creasing themselves, and I was creasing myself, and yeah, I was having a good time with this. And again, you get that throwback to that 90s nostalgia, because there's stuff in this story to do with old school computers and disk drives and dodgy internet, stuff that I've not had anything to do with for so many years now. So, I mean, VHS 99 at this point of the film is just absolutely on fire. So this is the fifth and final story, and when it started, I didn't think it was going to be as good as most of the others, because we begin with a seance this time, and it's a little bit slow and boring, and I remember thinking to myself, did we need a fifth story? Maybe we could have just wrapped it up after 4 and that would have been fine. But then, in a jiffy, things completely change. 2 of the characters get whisked off to some kind of hell world, and the story just takes on a whole new form. So I guess we're into like the wastelands of hell in this, and a couple of characters are just running around this place trying to survive, and there are demonic things coming at them and tormented humans, all sorts. It's really wacky and crazy, and I don't think they quite had the budget to make hell look as hellish and as nasty as maybe they would have wanted to. I'm just guessing on that, but still, what they've come up with is still really brilliant, and I was absolutely enthralled watching this thing play out. It reminded me a lot of the final story from the original VHS, actually. In that, a group of characters were trying to get out of this house, and hands were coming at them through the walls, and it very much felt like hell had been unleashed on Earth, and these hands and things were trying to get these characters. In this story, I kind of feel like hell has been unleashed again, but in hell this time. I feel like it's taken the concept just one step further. So it feels like this story could be a homage to the other story I was just mentioning, but I might be reaching. The person who did this story might have not at all been thinking of that other story from the original film. But I like how this ties into the seance, that the story in this kind of comes full circle. It connects together quite neatly without going into anything. I don't want to give anything away. There's a character in this called Mabel who turns up in the hell world. Now, I thought she was quite amusing when I was watching this, but after I'd watched the whole movie, I went online and looked at some random reviews of this, and a lot of people who watched this and enjoyed it, they seem to mention Mabel quite a lot, as if this is like a fan favourite character or something. I wouldn't say she was the best thing about VHS 99, but certainly looking back, yeah, I can see why a lot of people would have looked at this character and thought that she was a little bit wacky and fun and worth mentioning. But on the whole, when I look back at this fifth story, I never would have guessed that it would turn out this good after the opening that we get with the seance. So ultimately, that's now 4 out of 5 stories that have turned out to be absolutely great, and it leaves us in a really good position as we move into the climax of the review, where I will be giving my score. So without further ado then, let's get to the bag of terror and see about that score. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, struggling to hold them, and a half. 4.5 bloody axes out of 5. That is an incredible score. This is definitely one of the best films in this series for me. And I almost would have gone for the full 5 out of 5 masterpiece rating, you know. I just think the second story just holds me back from doing that. I think if that second story had been better, or if they'd have just taken that out completely and just gone with the other 4 stories, I think this would have been a masterpiece. So yeah, 4.5 out of 5. I absolutely love this film. This has just made me an even bigger fan of this franchise than I already was, and I can't wait to see next year's edition. I'm going to hold out in terms of doing a franchise ranking until next year, because I did one last year just after VHS 94 came out. So if I did it again now, I'd only be doing it for the sake of adding one more movie in. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it another 12 months and probably do a rewatch of all the films next October and watch the 6th film, and then I'll do my franchise ranking then. Right, that's it for today. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you all again another time soon. Until then, bye-bye.